Black Hole Revenge Release Part 2. You bully me for 8 years? Enjoy missing half your body. So to start off, I was 14 straight A student and vengeful as vengeful can get when this happened. When I was 6, a new kid came to my school, we'll call him douchebag, and started picking on me, but I didn't really pay too much attention. Fast forward a couple of years and I'm 11. The picking transformed into straight up bullying. Calling me names, beating me up for being a nerd, being atheist. His family is Christian. Stealing from me. He even hit me in the leg with a metal baseball bat, destroying my fibula and tibia. They're fine now. It got to the point where the popular kids ganged up on me and beat me up every day. This continued until that very day. We were leaving on a trip to the zoo. I was widely interested in animals, so I was excited. Douchebag must have seen this because he made my day a living hell. The time came, we got to the bears, and douchebag came to me and whispered, "I'd love to see you getting eaten alive by those things." Before we continue, I'll say that there was a 15-foot or so gap that separated the bridge we were standing on and the floor where the bears were. Back to the story. I backed off and waited for him to be distracted. I saw the opportunity, grabbed him by the legs, and dropped him beside a bear. The bear must have been scared because it started mauling. Douchebag. 2 other bears joined in. We were evacuated immediately. I just recently heard that douchebag survived but is missing both his eyes, his nose, his left arm, and both his legs. Nothing more satisfying than seeing the one who tormented you for almost a decade fall victim to your plans. No one messed with me after that day, douchebag. If you're reading this, I'm not sorry. Oh, that's right. You have no eyes. Don't be a snitch, idiot. I'm going to start this by saying that, unlike most people who post things like this, I'm not sorry at all. I know that what I did was, to put it mildly, evil. But, honestly, I don't care. Make of that what you will. I did what I did. This story takes place in the early 2000s in a large urban city that I'm going to decline to name. I was 17 at the time, a heroin addict, and my addiction had consumed my entire life. My mother threw me out of our apartment after I stole our rent money for the second time to pay my dealer. She did the right thing. No argument there. I was a terrible human, and in a way, I deserved the life I ended up leading after that. I'm still not a great person, but at least I don't get high anymore. I ended up a prostitute, not an escort, but the type of working girl you found on street corners, not in the phone book with a booking agent. It wasn't a fun job, and the guy I worked for was a complete jerk. But he kept me high more often than not and didn't beat me too often. So as far as I was concerned, it was whatever. He had other girls working for him too. We'll call them Honey and Sugar. Honey was all right. She was a user like me. And if I was short, she was always down to share a rinse or pitch and a little extra to get me straight. If I was feeling bad and our boss was in a bad mood, I liked her, so I never minded working with her. She also knew how to keep her mouth shut, which I appreciated. Sugar, on the other hand, was another story. This woman, anything she heard went right back to our boss. Anything she saw got reported. Kept a tip so you could buy some condoms or a candy bar? She snitched. Spent a little extra time with a client? She was running her mouth. She never shut up. And Honey and I hated her for it. The crazy part was that it didn't even win her points with our boss. He didn't like it any more than we did. He knew we did minor things, and as long as we weren't messing with his money, he didn't care about a few bucks here or there because it meant we weren't asking him for anything. But if she brought it to his attention, he had no choice but to do something about it. It got old fast. She was weird too. Even though she did all that, she still somehow thought we were all friends. Like, she'd snitch, and I'd get my ass beat. And then the next day she'd act all friendly, like she thought I just forgot what she did. She actually had the nerve to be hurt when I didn't want to work with her, and when Honey and I would get quiet and ignore her if we had to be around her. It was ridiculous. So yeah, safe to say I had a problem with her, and I was waiting for a chance to screw her over royally. The opportunity came on a slow night. It was about 1 a.m., pouring rain, and I was exhausted. I'd been out since about 9, and I'd only had one client, so I was worried about going home with too little money. Then this car rolled up. Nice car. A bit dated, but still nicer than most of the ones in the area. So I perked up, the window went down, And it was an older guy in his 50s. He had super dark hair that I could tell came out of a box because his mustache was salt and pepper. And the whole car smelled weirdly like mint. I didn't care, I needed the money, so I got in. He wanted full service, which meant $100 in my pocket, enough that I could call it a night. My boss wouldn't be happy, but I'd get my hit and be able to sleep without feeling sick. The guy drove us to the back of this shutdown bodega, and I was ready to just get it over with. We moved to the back seat, and he handed me my money. I looked down to tuck it into my bra, then started pulling up my skirt. I only took my eyes off him for a second, but all of a sudden, he grabbed me by the throat with both hands and started squeezing. The funny thing is, I wasn't even surprised. I seriously considered not fighting back, just letting it happen. I was miserable, my life was awful, and it wasn't like anyone would miss me. Would it really be so bad? It wouldn't technically be suicide, which meant I wouldn't go to hell. I was raised Catholic. I see the irony in my thinking now, believe me. Prostitution and drug use? Fine. Suicide? Absolutely not. Religion is a hell of a drug, kids. Just say no. In the end, I fought back. He had me halfway up against the door, so I pretended to pass out and went limp. He let go of my throat to get his fly down, I guess, and while he was leaning back, I pulled my leg up and kicked him in the groin, then reached behind me for the door handle. It wasn't locked, and I ended up on the ground on my ass. I got up and ran down the street as fast as I could, losing both my shoes in the process because there was no way I was trying to run in heels. Good news? I still had my money. My neck was bruised to hell and back, but before long, I was too high to care. Life went on. New day, same problems. 2 months later, in the middle of summer, Sugar and I were out together, Honey already had a client, and I had just come back from one, so I was using an alley to clean up. Sugar was standing on the sidewalk waiting, and then what do I see rolling down the road? The nice sedan. It slowed down, and I knew it was him. Same guy, same car, and Sugar was about to take the client. The same client who had almost killed me. He hadn't seen me where I was behind the dumpster, but I saw him. I could have said something. I could have yelled at Sugar and told her about the guy. But I didn't. I didn't say a word. I watched her get in that car. I watched the taillights fade into the distance, and I already knew Sugar wasn't going to be coming home that night. Bye, girl. Tell Daddy some stuff. Now? She didn't have a clue what she'd just gotten herself into either. See? I told Honey about the guy as soon as I got back, told her how he looked, what car he drove, and how he smelled so she wouldn't accidentally get in with the same psycho I did, but I never warned Sugar. Maybe, deep down, I was hoping I'd have the opportunity to do exactly what I did. Sugar didn't come back that night or any other in the next year I worked. I only saw the car one more time, driving slowly down the street, scoping out who was around. I waved and blew him a kiss. He did me a favor, after all, so no hard feelings about the whole strangling thing. I definitely wasn't getting in his car again, but I wasn't mad about it. He looked so confused, like he was actually going to stop for a minute. But I guess he thought better of it because he sped up and kept going. I never saw him or that car again. Not too long after that, I got arrested, which led to me actually getting clean and getting my life together. Never told anybody about what I did that night until now. Never told the cops about him either because A, I was doing my own dirt, and B, as long as Honey wasn't getting in his car, I didn't care who else he picked up. Still don't. Not my problem. No idea what happened to Sugar after she got in that car. I never heard anything about her again, and neither did anybody else. I knew. No body ever showed up either, so it's not 100% certain he killed her. But I think he did. I know he was planning to kill me that night. It explains why he didn't argue when I told him money first. He just handed it over. No pushback, no half now, half when we're done. He figured he'd just take it back after. Not like I was going to need it anymore. Joke's on him. I got away, and I didn't have to sleep with him. Sometimes everybody wins, except Sugar, that is. Because forget her. My wife cheated. She got pregnant with my kid, I gave her the choice to abort and then left her because I could not get over her infidelity. My 35-year-old wife and I, 32, have been married for 5 years and together for 8. Our relationship has always been genuine, or so I thought. Recently, she started complaining that I was neglecting her, and to be fair, she wasn't entirely wrong. I had just started a business with my friend, and building it from the ground up consumed most of my time and energy. I assumed she'd understand and support me, but instead, she resented how I no longer put effort into making her feel special. She's the kind of woman who expects constant affection and attention, and I simply didn't have the capacity to provide that. Another thing about my wife, she has a medical condition that makes pregnancy incredibly difficult. Having children has always been her biggest dream. A year into our marriage, she wanted to start trying and even considered IVF, but our insurance didn't cover it, so we decided to save up. Every time one of her sisters or friends got pregnant, she would cry, overwhelmed with jealousy and disappointment. She felt like she was failing as a woman, especially when visiting our parents, where she couldn't proudly announce a pregnancy like the others. With all this in mind, maybe I should have seen it coming. For months, I had a nagging feeling that something was off. She was busier than usual, distant, and distracted. Turns out, she was cheating with some guy she met on Tinder. She confessed on her own, swearing she would do anything to fix our marriage. I was disgusted, not just by the betrayal, but by how easily she gave up on us during a difficult time. I lost control, called her names I never thought I'd say to someone I loved. Then I shut down completely, giving her the silent treatment for weeks. Eventually, I agreed to therapy, though I wasn't sure it would make a difference. Then we found out she was pregnant. She came running out of the bathroom, practically glowing, calling it a miracle. She was over the moon, but I wasn't. She swore she never slept with the other guy, and a paternity test confirmed the baby was mine. But it didn't change how I felt. Our marriage was barely holding together, and we weren't in a place to have a child. I told her that if she truly wanted to repair our relationship, she had to put us first. There would be other chances for kids later. She begged me to reconsider. This was our baby, her dream come true, and she knew this might be her only chance to become a mother. But I refused to budge. I gave her an ultimatum: our marriage or the baby. She tried to change my mind, but in the end, she went through with the abortion. The doctor warned us that she might not be able to conceive again, but she did it anyway, hoping it would save our marriage. For a while, she acted like everything was fine. She was affectionate, hopeful, and determined to make things work. We even attended our first therapy session, but I couldn't move past what she had done. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was her with another man. The trust was gone. I reached out to a friend who's a divorce attorney and had papers drawn up. One night, while she was setting the table for dinner, I handed them to her. She froze, her face drained of color. Then the panic set in. She started sobbing, asking how I could be so cruel, how I could take her baby and now leave her with nothing. The prenup ensured she wouldn't get much, and she knew the chances of getting pregnant again were slim. She screamed and pleaded, but I walked out and never looked back. I know I hurt her. I don't know if forcing the abortion was the right choice or not. Maybe a part of me just wanted to be free of her because I couldn't imagine co-parenting with someone who betrayed me. So, am I the bad guy? Edit. Someone pointed out something I hadn't fully processed. I was still intimate with her while she was cheating. If I had known the truth, I never would have touched her. That feels like a violation of my consent, in a way I can't shake. Edit 2. I see a lot of people calling me heartless, and maybe they're right. What I did was cruel. But I loved this woman. I gave her a chance. And yet, in therapy, all I heard were excuses. She never truly took responsibility for what she did. I know I'm just trying to justify my actions, maybe even twisting things in my head to make myself feel better. The truth is, I'm hurting. And despite everything, I still wish I could go back to when we were young and in love. Before all of this happened, I came here to vent, maybe to get some validation. But now that the anger is fading, The guilt is hitting me full force. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did to her. I just hope it doesn't destroy me completely. I'm going to hell for this, and honestly, I don't care. When I was growing up, it felt like I was always caught between two worlds. In school, I was known as a quiet nerd, left to my own devices. But at home, I hung out with a rough crowd, always getting into trouble. There was drinking, fighting, drugs, and all sorts of dumb stuff, and I tried to keep those two lives separate. Since I was in special ed and got bused to a different school, it made it easier to keep things apart for the most part. Of course, there were a few slip-ups along the way, like the time I was in woodshop class and the trend at the time was having Velcro straps hanging off the backs of my high-top shoes. One student grabbed them, causing me to fall, and he ended up in the hospital after catching a claw hammer in the face. Between dealing with the psychological counseling and the trial, I realized I needed to stay away from petty stuff like that. The message I sent that day was loud and clear. Don't mess with me. People soon figured out that when I snapped, I was dangerous. As I worked on cleaning up my drinking and drug use, I made the decision to leave the violence behind as well. Not that I wasn't good at it. In fact, I was too good at it, and feeding the darkness inside me gave me a high that no drug could ever match. A few years later, I found myself at a local community college. I wasn't running with the same violent crowd anymore, but I still ran into them from time to time. I took some classes with my friend's little sister, and watching her go from a bratty little girl to a woman made me feel like I had another younger sister. She started dating a guy who, from what I knew, was a real piece of shit. He was a year younger than me, and the rumors I'd heard about him in high school made my blood boil. Apparently, he'd groped girls in the hallway, but because he was the star wide receiver for the football team, the school turned a blind eye. He lost his scholarship to a state college because of his grades, but there were rumors about rape allegations being swept under the rug. I warned her about this guy, but she didn't listen. After class one day, I went up to him to make sure he knew that she was like a little sister to me and that he needed to be careful. Afterward, she went to a school function with him, and then she disappeared from all her classes for a week. I dropped off her class notes at her parents' house, only to find out what had happened. He'd roofied her drink, taken advantage of her at the event, and left her under the bleachers for people to find. To make matters worse, he'd given her a few STDs. I was furious, and the revenge was set. I knew where he parked for class every day, so I skipped mine and waited for him to go back to his car. He drove an SUV, and I knew he kept a broom in the back for cleaning off his car during snow, armed with a pair of brass knuckles. I waited and then went to town on him. I grabbed that broom and dragged him into the woods, sticking it where the sun doesn't shine. I left him bent over a picnic table with the broom sticking out of him like I'd planted a flag. I then went to a local pharmacy to clean up the blood. Before visiting her older brother in prison to give him the heads up, I told him everything that happened and what I had done, asking him to keep an eye out for the guy on the inside. Luckily, I had a guardian angel watching over me, as the list of people who wanted him dead for similar actions was pretty long. I was questioned about it, but I gave them nothing and pointed them toward others I suspected might have been victims. The black hole revenge. I got a few names from people who had connections and made inquiries about where he would be sent after leaving the hospital. I found out he was going to a prison camp, but it was close enough to the unit where her older brother was that he could have influence. I dropped off some cash to grease a few wheels and ensure this guy would get what was coming to him. I figured he'd get shanked, but what actually happened was much worse. He was gang raped by 10 guys, and one of them infected him with HIV. They slit his rectum to make the area wetter and increase the chance of infection. After finishing up the messaging, I was shown a cell phone video of the entire thing before going into class. A few weeks later, he died of sepsis. The orderly in charge had been pocketing antibiotics and pain pills, double-dipping by selling them while also getting paid to treat him. The only witness to what I did was now dead, and all that remained was trying to help rebuild little sis. I know I'm going to hell for this, but I just don't care. Maybe the nightmares I've had for years since then will be penance enough, but who knows? I signed my ex-boyfriend up for the Church of Scientology. I saw that it was a funny trend to sign people up for random email lists and spam them, but I decided to take this a step further. Because he really burnt me in the past, I went to our local Church of Scientology's website and saw where you could input your personal information to receive messages from the church. Since I had most of this information from our time being together, I filled it out under his name. I did this with a few more churches of Scientology as well. I thought that this would only be a minor inconvenience with a few puzzling, harmless emails, but it turned out to be much worse. Recently, I saw that he posted on his Instagram that he was deleting all of his social media due to privacy reasons. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a while, I started to wonder if there was any connection to what I had put in the Church of Scientology's website. So, out of curiosity, I later decided to bite the bullet and DM him on Instagram in the hopes that he hadn't deactivated his account. A few minutes later, he responded, saying that he needed a break from social media. Ultimately, he told me to not worry about it, and that he was going to delete his Instagram, 10K followers, later that night. I figured I was off the hook. A few weeks later, I was with a mutual friend of ours, and she updated me on his situation. Apparently, him and his family had been contacted by the Church of Scientology. Supposedly, they actually expressed interest. The mutual friend said that she hadn't seen him in a while, and none of his friends had heard from him in over a month. She said that it seemed like he was cutting off everybody. I just received word that he's dropping out of school after the semester ends, and his family is moving to live with other church members. I know I technically signed him up for this, but I had no idea it would get this bad. He honestly deserved it after everything he did. I can't exactly state what he did in caution that this post would get removed. Just know it was pretty fucked up, and me and a friend of mine had to see a therapist. The Bank's Man. A lot of background. This is an old family story told as a story. I heard it directly from my mom. In the 1930s, during the Depression in America, a lot of farms were lost to bankruptcy and bank forfeiture. Very often, the bank would hire a local man who knew the local farmers and growers, and who would cooperate with the bank and sheriff in getting these farms and houses repossessed by the bank. Certain members of my family owned a small orange orchard in California's Central Valley that was holding its own, barely. Part of running an orange orchard at that time was a practice called smudging, where during a cold snap you could save the crop by burning oil in the smudge pots all over the orchard and keep the worst of the heat away. Smudging required the use of fuel oil to burn, and if you couldn't get the fuel oil to keep the crop alive and unfrozen, you'd lose more than half the value in a single night of freezing temperatures. So, growers would cooperate to buy into a fuel oil truck and share some of the operating costs. These trucks would go from farm to farm dispensing oil, and each grower would buy enough oil to put back into the trucks the amount they used for their orchards. Now it turns out that the local banksman in the area was a somewhat nearby neighbor of my family who also had his own small orchard. A certain relative of mine was a boy at that time, and he would earn extra money working for the banksman in his orchard. The banksman was a tyrant and a bully who beat his wife and children, and who savagely beat my relative any time that the work done was not to his satisfaction. After yet another beating, the banksman informed my relative that he was going to make certain that the smudge truck did not have enough oil for my family's orchard, and that when the crop was ruined, he'd make sure that the bank got the orchard. Times were very different then. My relative did not complain to his parents or tell them about the problem he was having with the bank's man. Here only talked to his friends about the situation. So, a few families in the area were aware of the bankman's plot. One of the jobs that the man insisted on was my relative crawling down in the hatch of the fuel oil truck and dragging a small pump hose inside so that the man could manually pump out the very last dregs of the oil at the bottom. This was also considered unfair by the other growers, because the next farmer in line always got a little less oil than he should have, and had to pay to make up the difference. No one said anything because everyone was afraid of the man's tyranny and temper. My relative decided that he'd had enough, and he was going to quit work for the man and try to find other work for the growing season. So, he told the man that he'd be quitting, and perhaps unwisely, he also told the man that he knew that the man was the one making the oil count come up short each week. The man beat my relative unconscious as retribution. But he chose a bad time to do it. Since my relative was unconscious laying out in the orchard, the man had to be the one to climb down into the bottom of the oil truck to set the pump hose in place. My relative wasn't actually unconscious, he was laying on the ground, faking. When he saw the man climb down inside, he climbed up to the hatch and apologized to the man for making him mad and offered to help. But when the last of the fuel oil was pumped up, my relative pulled up the pump and then locked and closed the hatch, trapping the man inside. After about half an hour, the fumes inside made the man pass out. My relative went home, and one of his friends arrived to pick up the truck. The friend drove the truck to the oil depot and filled it up. Then he drove it to the next farm in the rotation. The bank's man was missing for several days before anyone took serious notice, and eventually, his body was found in the tank. It was almost immediately ruled an accident, and no investigation was ever opened. His body was so saturated with oil and fumes that they had to bury him in a closed casket. The local funeral home in Strathmore refused to take him, so the funeral had to be held in Fresno instead, a long ways away. Almost no one attended. But the sons of several local farmers and growers spent a lot of time providing free labor, both to the widow and to my relative's parents all year that year. My relative's parents almost certainly knew what had happened to the man, but they didn't ever talk about it. I paralyzed my cousin for hitting my mom and blackmailing my sister. 2 years ago, my sister just started a new business in embroidery, and it got so well at first she would stay post-midnight working, just so she can finish people's orders. At that time, my cousin's new wife got jealous of her. She started spreading rumors about my sister sleeping with her husband, and I couldn't stand it at first because he's not doing anything about it. But it's a women's stuff, so it stays between women. Fast forward to July 2021. There was a small party held by my second uncle's daughter who graduated and everyone was invited. My sister and mother attended the party, and I had some important stuff to do. A couple of hours, I get a call from my mother telling me to come pick her up ASAP. I drove there thinking it was her glucose or blood pressure. But as soon as I got there, it was that cousin punching my mother. I let out so much at him. The only thing I remember is how they could not separate me from him, and how I kept hitting his lower half with a rock. The next day we were both rushed to the hospital. I had a 47 second-degree muscle tears that required rehabilitation, and he lost the ability to walk. So, on this all cases came to an end. Which story was the most memorable? And I hope that similar cases have not happened to any of you. Well, not that they did not happen at all, but that they were not so harsh and dangerous. Revenge always has a place to be. The main thing is that it is deserved. So please subscribe and like the video.